Hi, everyone, and welcome to the fall semester. So, this is just going to be an introduction video, just give you a little bit of background about myself. Whenever I teach online classes, I always recognize there's a weird disconnect that exists, since there is the potential that you would never see me. And so I always like to do a video recording, just providing some background and maybe going over a few of the assignments. We'll kind of see how long the background stuff takes. So, first things first, my name is Adam Austin. I have a PhD in something called experimental psychology, which means most of my schooling really dealt with conducting research studies, looking at research methodologies, learning different statistical analyses, and then taking a very broad look at different topics in psychology. And so, like a history and systems class is really fun for an experimental psychologist to teach because we get to look at all the different trends that psychology has gone through and overturned, and just really get to learn how this field has morphed and changed over time. Um, for my academic background, I went to the University of North Dakota. That's where I got my PhD from. I was born and raised in Minnesota, and so I actually did my undergraduate studies and got my bachelor's degree in my home city. So I was born and raised in St. Cloud, Minnesota, which is pretty much right in the center. And so if you hear the Midwestern accent come through, it's typically with the long O's. Yeah, I do get asked if I'm from Canada periodically, and not Canada, but pretty close. And so at the University of North Dakota, what I focused in on within the experimental psychology program was social and forensic psychology. So those are kind of the two main staples that I teach at Heritage University. I'm an adjunct, so I'm not a full-time instructor, but I've been teaching for Heritage for over a decade at this point. My full-time position is at Columbia Basin College in Pasco. And um, I do occasionally teach in-person courses for Heritage. There's a reason I haven't been lately, which we'll get into in a little bit. And I also realized my dog just got into frame, so yeah, he's here. So for kind of like the scholarly stuff, most of my research centers on what we call jury decision making, and it looks at what factors impact a jury's perspective of a crime. And the crimes that I typically investigate are sex crimes, and recently human trafficking. So I've had a few publications recently with both a colleague at Columbia Basin College, and we've been working with some researchers in the UK, looking at cross-cultural differences in perspectives of human trafficking, how people understand it, how people view it in the courtroom. So that's kind of my scholarly background. Um, on a kind of personal, one of the things that I always feel like I don't know if it's important for students to learn, but I have some policies built around this fact, and so try to get an understanding. One of the policies that I have is if it's after 5 p.m., I'm probably not replying to any emails. And that's just because I do have a wife and two kids. So here we all are. These were pictures from looks like June 10th. Um, so my wife, her name is Michaela. She is a small business owner. She's a massage therapist and has her own, I'll call it practice because I'm not sure if that's the actual term for it. Um, and she's been doing that for 3 or 4 years at this point. Prior to that, she worked at BioLife Plasma Services as a assistant manager. And then my daughter, her name's Abigail. She's going to be starting second grade in, I guess, a week, which seems really quick. And then my son, his name's Jace. He's going to be 2 next week. And so, yeah, that's kind of the crew. But for the most part, with school getting out and my wife getting off work, I typically try to cut it off around 4 or 5 p.m. that I'm going to do my best to put work aside. Um, when I do that, I will say most of the grading typically happens late in the evening. So I might still see messages, just if it's something that I'm going to reply to right away or not, will vary based upon the message. But just kind of know if you send something after 4 or 5 p.m., I'm probably not replying to it until the next day. Just so that way I can spend time with them. My daughter also has a very active life, which my wife and I always comment, like, is that how just it is? Because we don't remember being that active. But pretty much every evening she has some event, whether it's piano lessons or gymnastics or soccer or swim lessons or something. So um, just kind of know that I will always encourage students to look at assignments early. Um, I don't have any problem with students working on the assignments up to the deadline. On my end, it doesn't change anything. I'm still going to wait till after the due date to start grading them. But one of the things that is inevitable is that students will look at an assignment at like 10 p.m. on the due date and then send me a message saying, I don't understand it, or I want a clarifying something or other. And yeah, I'm not answering those. So just kind of be aware of that. So again, I always encourage people to look at assignments early. Doesn't mean you have to do them early, but just look at them to see, do you have any questions? And if so, feel free to, obviously reach out to me earlier in the week. Um, so outside of that, just a little bit of, kind of an introduction to the class. So history and systems looks at really the start of psychology, which is rooted in philosophy and up to modern day in our understanding. And there's a whole lot of twists and turns that happen. Um, and so few things. First thing is that I don't have any recorded lectures as of yet. Um, I used a hosting site that ultimately apparently closed on May, and I didn't realize it, so I didn't download the videos, which is probably fine. They were probably due for a refresh anyway. So they will be posted as we get to that topic, but I do now need to play catch up on getting those lectures recorded. So that's kind of one thing, just to make sure everybody's aware of that. You will start seeing links, or not sure how I'm gonna do it now that that hosting has been pulled, but I'll figure it out. Um, and then the other thing that if you look at the syllabus, you'll notice that I have, big names within each category that you've probably heard about in a psychology course that you've taken. So whether it's Freud or Skinner or Bandura. But then I also tried to kind of get less represented voices to the class. And it's why I don't use a textbook in this class. Most of the textbooks really focus on, the people that you've already heard about and kind of make it seem like nobody else was really doing psychology research. It also kind of makes it sound like it's a very eventually becomes just America. That's the only country that's doing psychology. Prior to World War II, you had a lot of Austrians and Germans that were incredibly valuable to the growth and development of psychology that fled um, Europe during World War II, find themselves in the US, and then help kind of shape the US understanding of psychology as well. But I think it's really important to also understand that there's voices of women that are typically underrepresented in psychology just with social status of women, going into the really 1970s, 1980s. Prior to that, many women had to publish under their husband's name or just would kind of be pushed aside for, a male in the field. And also people of color typically don't get the same level of recognition in the history of psychology as they should. And again, you can look at least in America, civil rights movement happening in 1964, 1965. We get laws passed, but it's not as if that then kind of opened the floodgates. So um, in my class, there's no textbook, but I do have selected readings from, again, some big name ones, but every single unit will have at least one article that is either from a woman or a person of color, just to try to round out the narrative a little bit more. Um, when you look at the syllabus, you also notice that there's no tests or quizzes. With this being a 400 level course, I fully trust that you would be able, especially being online, do well with quizzes. And I don't know if that's the best way to actually ensure like learning's happening or for you to retain information. So all of your assignments are written papers. And so again, as you are looking through the syllabus, if you have any questions or any concerns about any of those, please let me know. The only one that like I foresee causing points of confusion is that throughout the semester, you do have to do four different article summaries. And the articles consist of three every week. So you will do essentially for a single submission, you will be summarizing three different articles based upon that topic. It's a lot of reading throughout this class, which is why I don't want you to have to do it every single week. My words of encouragement is always like on the weeks that you're not planning on doing the full reading summary, to instead like pick one article that you're more interested in reading. There's not tests, so it's not like you need to memorize every single word, but to kind of get a scope of, all right, how did this person impact the field? I think is valuable and just kind of a valuable outcome of this class. So, yeah, with that, don't want the introduction video to be too long. This first week is really just for you to get kind of aligned, get back into the swing of things of the fall semester. So there's no assignments, there's no readings, other than hopefully reading your syllabus. But starting next week, we'll actually enter content and it will be the foundations. And so we'll look at Vunt and James, who are kind of late 1800s, early 1900s. I don't cover a lot of the like philosophy of Socrates and things that obviously important, but there's a lot of things to cover that have happened within the last 150 years that I think is more important than going back to like that era. So, yeah, so just know like this week is just kind of get yourself comfortable, check things out, ask the questions that you have, and then know next week we're getting into content. Other than that, if you have any questions about anything, absolutely feel free to send me an email or a message. As an adjunct, I don't have designated office hours, but I'm happy to meet with students via Zoom when we can come up with a time. What I always ask students to do is just, if you want to meet with me, just say like, hey, can we have a meeting? These are the times that I'm available. And then just let me select one of the times, assuming one of them works. There's a lot of back and forth that can happen that just seems redundant to me. If you're like, hey, can I meet with you? The answer is yes. Like that's part of my job. And it's actually a part that I really like is meeting with students and talking with them about concepts and all that stuff. So yeah, so you don't need to just ask like, can I meet? The answer is always going to be yes, we can. So then my reply is going to be yes, when are you available? And then you're going to send me the list of times anyway, and I'm going to pick one so we can just kind of cut out that little bit of exchange. And set up the meeting faster. So, yeah, if you have questions, let me know. Otherwise, I hope all of you have a great rest of your week, and hopefully the first week of the semester goes well for all of you.